Welcome to Rapid Report. Washington assumed Canada would always been under pressure, but January 2026 changed everything. Energy, uranium, potash, water. The U.S. relies heavily on Canadian resources, and this trade clash revealed the truth. North America is a system, not a hierarchy. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for fast, clear, independent analysis. For a generation, Washington operated on an unspoken assumption. When pressure rises, Canada will bend. The logic felt comfortable, almost instinctive. The United States is bigger, louder, richer, and militarily dominant. Canada, in this worldview, was a dependable neighbor, polite, resource-rich, and ultimately dependent on access to the American market. If a confrontation ever came, the thinking went, Ottawa would blink first. January 2026 shattered that illusion. What unfolded over a single weekend was not just a trade dispute. It was a stress test of North American reality. And the results stunned markets, rattled the Pentagon, and revealed how deeply the United States is tethered to Canadian soil, Canadian minerals, and Canadian infrastructure. This was not a tariff fight. It was a reminder that geography still rules power. When pressure met resistance. The trigger was dramatic but deceptively simple. A sweeping U.S. tariff regime targeted Canadian imports across the board: energy, metals, timber, minerals. The stated aim was renegotiation, forcing Canada into concessions over trade rules and control of its natural resources. The expectation in Washington was familiar: quiet diplomacy, polite protest, and eventual compromise. Instead, Canada reached for a tool no one expected. Rather than taxing exports, Ottawa moved to restrict them. Licenses were frozen. Strategic resources were reclassified. Pipelines slowed. Trains stopped. What had always flowed freely across the world's longest undefended border suddenly became scarce. Within hours, the effects cascaded south. The myth of energy independence. For years, Americans were told their country had broken free from foreign energy reliance. Shale fields in Texas and North Dakota became symbols of national revival. Production soared, exports surged. Independence, it seemed, had arrived. But independence, as it turns out, depends on chemistry. Much of the oil produced in the United States is light and low in sulfur. It is excellent crude, but the country's largest refineries were not built for it. Those facilities were engineered decades ago to handle heavy, dense crude, the kind that must be cracked, cooked, and refined with specialized equipment. That heavy crude comes from Canada. For years, Canadian oil sands quietly became the backbone of U.S. refining. When supplies from Venezuela collapsed and Mexican production declined, Canada filled the gap. Millions of barrels per day flowing directly into the American industrial blood stream. When that flow slowed, refineries didn't just face higher costs, they faced dysfunction. Midwestern fuel hubs rely overwhelmingly on Canadian feedstock. Without it, production drops sharply. Diesel shortages emerge. Jet fuel tightens. Gasoline availability becomes uneven. Infrastructure cannot simply reverse itself overnight. Pipelines don't magically change direction, and rail capacity has limits. The result? Not gradual inflation, but immediate disruption. A continental machine with a border switch. The energy system of North America was built on an assumption that the border would never harden. Pipelines cross it. Power grids interlock across it. Rail networks assume frictionless passage. Once that assumption broke, the machine seized. Strategic reserves could soften the blow, but they were never designed to replace a specific grade of oil delivered daily at massive scale. And they sit hundreds of miles from the regions most dependent on Canadian supply. Energy independence, exposed under pressure, turned out to be energy specialization, with Canada as the indispensable partner. Uranium, the quiet leverage. If oil shocks move markets, uranium shocks nations. Roughly 1/5 of U.S. electricity comes from nuclear reactors. They provide stability, constant power when renewables fluctuate and demand spikes. But the fuel that keeps those reactors humming does not come from American mines. It comes from abroad. For years, the supply chain leaned on Eurasia. Then geopolitics intervened. Sanctions and bans narrowed the field, leaving one dominant, reliable source: Canada. Northern Saskatchewan hosts some of the richest uranium deposits on Earth. The ore is exceptionally pure. The mines are stable. The supply chain is trusted. For the U.S. nuclear sector, civilian and military alike, Canada became essential. When export approvals paused, the impact wasn't immediate panic, but strategic dread. Nuclear plants refuel on tight schedules, miss the window, and reactors must shut down. Restarting them is neither quick nor cheap. As summer demand looms, even a handful of offline plants could strain grids across major population centers. And uranium is not a commodity you replace casually. From mining to enrichment to fuel fabrication, the process takes years. Spot markets cannot solve structural dependence. Canada knew this, and by treating uranium as a national security asset, it revealed just how asymmetric the leverage had become. Potash, the crisis beneath the soil. Energy moves nations. Food sustains them. Few Americans think about fertilizer, yet modern agriculture depends on it as critically as fuel depends on refineries. Potash, one of the three core components of industrial fertilizer, is irreplaceable at scale. Without it, crops weaken, yields fall, and supply chains fracture. Canada dominates this market. The province of Saskatchewan alone supplies the overwhelming majority of potash used by U.S. farmers. There is no rapid substitute, no emergency stockpile, no alternative mine ready to surge production. As shipments stalled just weeks before planting season, farmers faced an impossible calendar. Miss the window, and the harvest shrinks months later. Prices rise not just for grain, but for meat, dairy, and processed foods downstream. This is how trade disputes turn into grocery bills. And while American barns emptied, Canadian producers remained secure, able to redirect supply globally, benefiting from rising prices rather than absorbing losses. The strategic awakening in Ottawa. For decades, Canada accepted dependence on the U.S. market as a fact of life. Convenience, proximity, and shared history made it seem inevitable. That mindset changed. Policy announcements over recent months pointed to a clear shift: diversify or remain vulnerable. Pacific export routes expanded. Asian partnerships deepened. Regulatory barriers fell for LNG, minerals, and energy infrastructure aimed westward rather than south. Canada concluded that over-reliance on a single customer, even a friendly one, was a national risk. And unlike many nations, Canada could afford patience. Resource-rich economies can endure short-term pain more easily than consumption-driven ones. Food, water, and energy provide resilience. Markets provide leverage, but only when goods can move. Aluminum, defense, and the industrial core beyond energy and food lies another pressure point: metal. Modern manufacturing runs on aluminum, lightweight, strong, and energy-intensive to produce. Canada, with abundant hydropower, became one of the world's cleanest and most efficient aluminum producers. U.S. industries quietly built themselves around that fact. Cars, aircraft, rockets, armored vehicles. Many depend on Canadian smelters. When tariffs disrupted cross-border supply chains, just-in-time manufacturing faltered. Auto plants slowed. Defense planners grew uneasy. Reports had already warned that secure access to Canadian aluminum was fundamental to national security. Competing for global supply against China, under sanctions and environmental constraints, was never part of the plan. Water, the unspoken resource. Then there is water, the resource rarely mentioned aloud. Canada holds a staggering share of the world's fresh water. Rivers, lakes, and reservoirs cross borders, governed by treaties built on cooperation and trust. In calm times, those frameworks work. In tense times, they become pressure points. Adjustments to reservoir management, justified for domestic needs, can ripple downstream. Hydropower capacity shifts. Industrial regions feel the squeeze. Data centers, factories, and cities rely on flows they do not control. Water, unlike oil or metal, has no substitute. The real lesson. This confrontation revealed something uncomfortable. Power is not only measured by GDP, markets, or military strength. It is measured by control of essentials. The United States remains a superpower, but superpowers still eat, drive, heat homes, and plant crops. In North America, many of those lifelines run through Canada. The idea that one partner needs the other more collapsed under real-world pressure. What emerged instead was mutual dependence, uneven, complex, and impossible to ignore. Trade wars assume flexibility. Geography does not. It will not end with victory speeches or sweeping triumphs. It will end quietly, with calls, exemptions, and face-saving language. Reality always wins eventually. But the damage is already done. Markets have learned something new. Policymakers have been reminded of something old. And Canadians, long treated as predictable, demonstrated that restraint is a choice, not a weakness. North America is not a hierarchy. It is a system. And systems break when one side forgets how much it relies on the other. Canada showed that restraint is power, not weakness. The U.S. learned a tough lesson. Dependence runs deep. Like, share, and subscribe to Rapid Report for more insights that cut through the headlines. Thanks for watching.